question. Yes, this was helpful, and it indeed felt that I was guided to watch this whole video. I also realized that I will have to return to this video later, as I want to make sure that I don't fall into this trap again. I know that there's a part of me that likes to think that all spiritual teachers are talking about the same thing from different points of view. But here I realize that there can actually be quite subtle traps. It also hit me good what you said about not having energy. I've had some bursts of energy recently and have been wondering about how to increase that. Now I realize that I've mistakenly been on this non-self path. Could you maybe give me some more detailed and concrete and therefore relatable examples of the subtle manifestations of the dualistic mind? I would appreciate some help with discriminating when I fall into this line of thinking. Maybe comparing how a person thinking they have no self and a person who is in contact with their higher self would act differently in different situations. Okay, so I have actually given quite a few talks about the duality consciousness in my playlist about non-duality. And I have one where I talk at length about how to overcome duality and what duality is. So I think it would be important to watch those to get some general feel for it. But I certainly agree that it would be a good idea to give some examples. I've in several of my non-duality videos, I talked about this, that the essence of the dualistic mind is that there's always two opposites. And what people do is that they go, you go into duality, right? So you could say, let's say there's a midpoint. And when you first go into duality, you stand there in a midpoint between two dualistic extremes. But in order to stay in duality, you will tilt, you will go towards one extreme. And so the ego is created out of this going into duality, seeing yourself as a separate being. And the ego can only go in one direction. So when it started going towards one dualistic extreme, it has to keep going until it becomes too much of a strain. You can't do it anymore. And then it is possible that you could see the futility of duality, and you could again come back to this state of being connected and start climbing up towards greater and greater states of being connected. But it's also possible that the ego can cause you to flip from one dualistic extreme to the other. And I've explained in some non-dual videos that the one dualistic extreme you can go into is that you create this separate sense of self, which we can call the ego, but it's made up of these many individual selves. So this ego, you can seek to raise it to the ultimate status of being enormously sophisticated, knowing everything. And it's almost like what the ego wants to do is it wants to make itself immortal, a permanent being. It wants to, so to speak, go into heaven. And this is what can never happen, because as I've explained, once you go into duality, duality is outside of oneness, the one mind, and it can never be permanent. I explained this in my video about how the world was created, why we are in a world that isn't permanent. Nothing that is of this world can be permanent, and the ego is created in this world can never become permanent. But the ego thinks this. So there are people who have gone towards that extreme for a very long time, many, many lifetimes, where they have attempted to elevate the ego, the separate self, to a status of being infallible and immortal. And there can come a point where the strain becomes so much. And now the ideal scenario is that they realize the futility of thinking that from the viewpoint of the ego you can define how the world is. And therefore they go back, they ask for help from a spiritual teacher who is one with a one mind, and they are willing to look at each of their illusions. But what can also happen is that you flip from the one extreme of wanting to elevate the separate self to the other extreme of wanting to deny that there's any kind of self. So you either elevate the self to an ultimate status, or you deny that there's any kind of self. But you see, either way, what you are doing is you're trying to define how the world works from the state of separation. Because, as I explained, there is a real part of you that is the conscious self, the conscious you. And it is an extension of your spiritual self, which exists in the spiritual realm. And it is real, and it can become immortal through the process of the ascension. So, I know this is still theoretical, but just to set a background a little bit. So, comparing how a person thinking they have no self and a person who is in contact with a higher self would act differently in different situations. So, if you have no self, if you think you have no self, if you think that the way to get to an ultimate state is to deny the self and to lose all sense of self, obviously life has no purpose. Practical life on earth has no purpose. And you see many of the people who have gone into this non-duality neo-Advaita is they suddenly feel like nothing has any meaning. Nothing is worth doing. They can't function in life, they can't have any enjoyment out of life, can't function in a relationship, can't function in a job, can't really do anything. And in contrast to that, a person who sees that I'm an extension of my higher self, sees that life has tremendous purpose. And part of the purpose of life is that your I Am Presence sent you as an extension of itself into the world, partly because it wants to experience the world, but also it wants to express itself in the world, express its co-creative abilities. So it wants to create something in the world. And so when you have that perspective, life has a profound meaning. And there can be different aspects of this, but one of the things that could be said here is that you can say, well, obviously when you have contact with your higher self, there are certain things in the world you don't do, because your higher self doesn't have an experience, doesn't have a desire to experience, for example, how it is to manipulate or exploit other people or participate in mindless pleasures that don't really get you anywhere. So there are certain things you don't do, but whatever you do it fully and you enjoy it. You're not feeling guilty about it. You're not feeling this is non-spiritual. You are enjoying life. But you are also, you have a sense that I've talked about many times, that you have a life plan. And before you came into this embodiment, the conscious you met with your spiritual teachers, and within the awareness of your higher self, it created this plan for this lifetime. And now you are seeking to tune into this intuitively and get a more conscious feel for what that is. And it involves two things. First of all, what you wanted to overcome in your psychology. It also involves what you want to do, bring as a gift to the world. So you're very much focused on, first of all, every situation you see is an opportunity to see something in yourself, these subconscious selves that I always talk about. Whereas if you think there is no self, you're just thinking that whatever may come up in your mind is just unreal. It's just an illusion. So you should ignore it. You shouldn't look at it. You should either try to suppress it or just ignore it, because it's just going to go away when you awaken from the dream. But as I explained, you have these subconscious selves in your subconscious mind. And they are created by you making choices. And the only way that you can be free of them is that you come to see a particular self, see the illusion that you were clouded by when you created the self, and then you consciously dissolve it. Then you are free of it. You are free of this self. And then you become more of yourself. More free to be yourself. And you don't suppress anything. So that's one thing. you could say that if a person who believes in non-self experiences a situation where that person has a strong reaction to something, you'll just say, oh, it's unreal, I don't need to look at it. But if a person who's on the path that I'm talking about experiences the same, they'll say, okay, I have a reaction here. There must be a self. Let me look at this. Let me look at myself and resolve this. And the non-self person will suppress, and the path person will resolve and therefore become more free. You also can see that, in a sense, when you go into this non-self, you go into a downward spiral, because you are literally thinking that as long as things have meaning, as long as you have a reaction to things, as long as there's something you want to do in the world, this is pulling you away from the non-self state. You are supposed to go into a state where basically you don't exist and you don't want to do anything in the world, because this is the highest spiritual growth, you think. But when you're on the path that I'm talking about, you are actually seeing that everything that happens to you, everything you do has a profound meaning, because it serves to help you see something in yourself, brings you closer to being free or one with your higher self, and you're really enjoying being creative, bringing forth something. It's not that you are identified with it in a human way, you see, but it's like the non-self people are saying, any kind of enjoyment, anything you do in the world is non-spiritual. It'll take you away from the ultimate realization, awakening or enlightenment. And they think there's only two ways. Either you're completely focused on pleasure like people in the world, or you are denying the self. But what I'm saying is there's a middle way, the middle way of the Buddha, that you're not, you're in the world, you're not of the world. You're not attached to these things, you're not identified with them, but still you find enjoyment in being alive and expressing yourself. And it's like, when you are going into the non-self, you're going towards self-annihilation, where you don't exist anymore. And when you are on the path, you are going towards higher and higher oneness with your higher self, which every step you go towards that is feeling more and more fulfilled. You're feeling more and more who you are. And you also see that the ultimate goal is that you can ascend from earth. You don't have to reincarnate, you don't have to stay here, but you can ascend, and then you become a permanent being in the spiritual realm. So those are some of the differences. And I look at this phenomenon, and that's why I started doing these videos about non-duality, because I could see that there were some people there who are very well-meaning, who have the exact same drive for spiritual growth that I've had all my life, but they have been trapped in this blind alley, where it's like, it's like it's a self-negating form of spirituality. Whereas, and I understand it, because as I've explained before, when my first spiritual movement was transcendental meditation, and I got these Vedic teachings, and what I got out of this was exactly this: there is no purpose, because it's just these huge cycles of billions of years, and we have all of these incarnations, then we disappear back into Brahman. And it was only when I found the Center Master teachings that I realized this is actually a completely false teaching. Because the reality is that we start with a point-like sense of self, and we have the potential to expand it until we ascend from earth and we go into the spiritual realm. And then even there, we keep expanding it until we reach the greater consciousness. That's what I explained in my video about how the world was created. So this gives you a whole different framework on life. And you know, the question is, how would a no-self person and a person on the path act differently in different situations? And you know, I've explained some of it, but I think there's a fundamental difference is that in a sense, you could say a person who believes in no self, you're never really there in a situation. You're never fully there because you're always thinking, oh, I shouldn't be involved with the world. Whereas when you're on the path, you are looking at every situation as an opportunity for growth. And first of all, you're looking, do I have a reaction here? Okay, what does this say about a subconscious self that I haven't seen yet? And then you go after it until you see it, and then you experience you're more free, you're more connected. But you also look at the situation as an opportunity to feel fulfillment because you've expressed something. You know, why am I doing all these videos that I'm doing? It's just because I felt that there was a point where my higher self wanted to express itself through me and bring something out into the world that people can find. And I am willing to do this, so I'm willing to spend the time on it. And I feel great fulfillment when I feel the flow through me from my higher self doing this. I mean, it's fulfilling to do it. And I'm not doing it because I want to be famous on YouTube. I'm not doing it because I want to make money. It's just for the joy of self-expression. Because I feel like I'm paying back because I have received so much help over the 48 years I've been on the spiritual path, from physical teachings and teachers, from other people, and first of all from the Ascended Masters. And there just comes a point where it's enjoyable to share that with others. Just put it out there. I'm not even concerned about how many views it gets, but just the fact that it's there and people can find it. So, you know, I have a purpose for doing this, and it's enjoyable. That's why the person is talking about energy, because I said that some of these non-dual teachers that talk about no self, it's like you look at them and there's no radiation coming out of them. There's no life force, life energy, because they're all, you know, they think you're supposed to have no expression at all because that proves you have no self, whereas if you sound like you are happy, then that's probably just a self. And I'm not trying to make fun of people, but I'm just trying to say, you know, you can either become less and less happy and enthusiastic by trying to destroy the self, or you can connect to your real self, your higher self, and become more and more happy, more and more enthusiastic, more and more energetic. I mean, it's just, you know, it's night and day difference there. And then the other thing is that when you go into the no self thing and you really think that the goal of your existence is to achieve non-existence, you can't avoid building tension. I don't care what these people say about, oh, I'm awakened, I've experienced ego death, I have no self, I'm pure awareness, I'm enlightened, whatever they say. You can't avoid, when you are trying to negate your sense of self, you can't avoid creating tension in your subconscious mind. And sooner or later, there's going to be a blow up. I mean, sooner or later. It can't be any other way, because you are just building that tension and you can't suppress it indefinitely. So I think that whereas when you go on the path that I'm talking about, you get less and less tension because you overcome these subconscious selves. It's like I've said in, you have all these subconscious selves that are making your life difficult. And you see many of these people who are talking about how they had a very difficult situation, and then they were maybe suicidal or very depressed, and then suddenly they had a breakthrough and they saw something. And now they have interpreted that experience, that breakthrough experience, to mean that they should strive to have no self. So what made their lives difficult was all these subconscious selves they have. Now they are creating a new self based on the idea of no self. And they are using that self to try and suppress all of the other selves. And for a time that can work. And so you feel like you don't have any problems anymore. But it is done by creating more and more tension in your subconscious mind. And sooner or later, as many people have now witnessed, you can find many videos out there, it's going to surface again. These other subconscious selves are going to break through, and the new self you create isn't going to be able to suppress them anymore. And some non-dual teachers have been honest enough to describe that process and admit that. And so I think it's very important to pay attention to this. But what I wanted to say with this is that when you go into trying to negate the self, you're trying to do the impossible, as I've said in several videos. What is the self that says, I have no self? There is always going to be a self. And it really isn't the highest spiritual growth that you come to a point where you have no self. What the highest spiritual growth is you come to a point where you have none of these subconscious separate selves. And you see yourself as the conscious you who's an extension of your higher self. That's the essence. That's when you know who you really are, instead of thinking you're all these outer things. And I understand the dynamic. It's the outer selves that make you suffer. You want to escape suffering. But why is it that the only option is to have no self? No, it is to return to your original state of self that isn't suffering. Because your higher self is not suffering, no matter what you're going through down here. And in fact, as I've tried to explain many times, the conscious you that's the core of yourself isn't suffering either. The conscious you is experiencing. The conscious you is not suffering. It is experiencing suffering, but it can only experience suffering through a separate self. When it looks through that filter, that's when you experience suffering. So take note of what I just said there. The conscious you is not suffering. Suffering is an experience. And it's an experience you can only have through a separate self, a self based on separation and duality. Now, the conscious you is what? It's, in a sense, an experiencer. So the conscious you is always going to have an experience. Even when I say you go into this state of pure awareness, neutral awareness. Yeah, the conscious you is still there experiencing. You can go into connecting with your I am presence and you experience your I am presence, but you're still the conscious you experiencing. So the conscious you experiencing will last until you ascend. And then in the ascension process, you merge with your I am presence. So then you are no longer an extension of the presence. You are the presence. And exactly how that process works is, first of all, difficult, I think, to put words on it. But second of all, I haven't experienced it. I haven't ascended. But this is my understanding of it. And so, but even beyond that, the I am presence is also an experiencer. Because in a sense, this is part of why we exist. We exist partly to grow towards a greater consciousness, but we also exist because the Creator experiences its own creation through us from our individual vantage points. And so it's not the purpose to come to a point where you don't exist and you have no experience. A very big part of the purpose of why we even exist is to experience the Creator's creation and to appreciate it and enjoy it and find fulfillment in being part of this incredible tapestry of life that our Creator has created in this world of form.